Thank you very much. Thanks, Bruce. A great pleasure to be in California. And indeed, IPv6 has kept us busy for quite a number of years. In fact, Latif and I started even before that, in the days of ISDN. We were part of the ISDN forum. Of course, nobody wants to admit that they did ISDN at one point in time in their life. But IP was not to be done. I remember the consultant we had in 1992. He said, don't touch IP, it's insecure, there's no quality of service, there's no billing system. Serious people should stick to ISDN and broadband ISDN. In fact, today IP still has quality of service problems and still has billing problems. So this being said, the theme of today, the one message, there's an IPv6 money trail. And one has to be careful, Latif was saying, to put up a startup. I tried to do that at one point in time. I gave a big presentation to a Boston consulting firm, an investment firm, talking about IPv6. And at the end of the talk, the investor said, can you show me in graphic form how much money has been made with IPv1, 2, 3, 4, and 5? So then I thought to myself, you have a problem there. Don't sell IPv6. Sell something you can do with it. So this would be the main message I would like to convey to everybody. As Bruce was saying, Tata Group, of course, I think most of you know the Tata Group. It goes from steel to cars to tea to hotels. So when I go to India, I sleep at a Tata hotel, drive in a Tata car, drink Tata tea and Tata. And someone was asking if I get a Jaguar or Land Rover as end-year bonus. I sent an email but didn't get a reply yet. So first of all, the Ipv4 Exhaustion, which has excited everybody. This has been an interesting theme over the last 10 years with everyone trying to predict when we would run out. And of course, the two champions of predictions have always been Jeff Houston and Tony Hayne. So in one corner, you had Jeff, in the other, you had Tony. In fact, at one of the Australian IPv6 forums, they nearly simulated a fight. And interesting enough, looking at the same data, you had a spread between 2008 and 2020 on when actually IPv4 addresses would run out. And the negative effect of all of that is that everyone was waiting and waiting to see when it would run out, because IPv6 is an expense. It's not revenue generating per se, so everyone had more urgent things to do than implement IPv6. So anyway, the years went by, and then all of a sudden, IANA ran out of IPv4 addresses. So there was a little blurb of excitement, and of course then it was no fun anymore to predict when we would run out of IPv4 addresses on a global level. Then the new game in town was to try to guess when each of the five regional internet registries would run out. And there again, we had some statistics. In Hong Kong early this year, that's what it looked like. And then if you went to another one of these real meetings a couple of months later, all of a sudden, Asia had run out of IPv4 addresses. And that was the real wake-up point, because all of a sudden, APNIC, the Asian registry, started to ration IPv4 addresses, and they only give /22. So people like our mobile operator in India asked early this year for a big IPv4 address block, and APNIC said, no, you get a small one, but you can get a big IPv6 block. And all of a sudden, great excitement. What is that IPv6? What do we have to do to implement? And. So the whole phenomenon really started to accelerate. And if we continue to go to these things, the very last session was the APNIC. That was in August in Busan in the south of Korea. And there you have, again, these drifting curves. And again, everyone seems to converge. The AFRINIC, which was out in 2016, now is down to 2014. Logically, the next one to run out would be the Europeans. But again, what is the merit of this exercise? We're running out anyway, so it's like trying to to try to guess how much time the Titanic will stay afloat by counting how fast the deck chairs fall off the deck. But this is a very interesting exercise. It depends how sticky the deck is. So this being said, IPv6 is more than about addresses. It's really something else. It solves the address shortage. That's quite obvious. But by doing so, it allows you to do a lot of other things. And one of the things which is quite interesting is everything which is auto-configuration. That's, in my opinion, one of the most exciting parts, because you have now NEMOs, networks in motion, you have MANETs, mobile ad hoc networks. Of course, if you're a network in motion, you don't want to reconfigure at the time. If you're ad hoc, you don't want to reconfigure. If you're in the military and the enemy is shooting at you, I don't want to look for my IP address. I have other things to do. And if you install a new device at home, it's also better that it works, and yet you don't have to have your mother-in-law configure IPv4 addresses. So basically, this is one of the domains, and obviously, if you're talking about Internet of Things, it's also better to have some auto-configuration. Other aspect which is quite interesting is mobility. In fact, one often forgets, if you go back to the IETF work 10 years ago, IPv6 was developed with mobility in mind. It solves a lot of problems, like the famous triangle. You don't need foreign agents and things like that anymore, so you have scalable mobility. As Latif was saying, we're going to a mobile broadband world, and again, most of the advanced countries now, in the meantime, have more internet access on mobile devices and with smartphones and things like that. In fact, they're getting too smart for me. I just bought a Samsung Galaxy, and this morning I didn't figure out how to turn off the alarm. So it's really too smart. Other aspect is multicast. Multicast is quite interesting. Again, IPTV and broadband video on the internet is quite interesting. And security, some people would say it improves security, some people will say it doesn't, but in my opinion, it does. Other aspect back to mobility is the famous battery life improvement. I think we'll hear more about it from John tomorrow, and it really does, because if you have to go and look for keep alive messages all the time, it really drains battery life. So these are the little concrete advantages of IPv6, and same if you have sensor networks. Now, famous IPv6 Day, that was quite interesting. Everyone earlier this year got involved, including ourselves. Our CIO asked, would it not be dangerous? He had scenarios of the whole world collapsing. I think most CIOs in most companies participating in IPv6 Day had the same fear. We put our website accessible in IPv6. The world didn't stop, and IPv6 Day went well as far as I'm concerned. And obviously, one had to set up a whole kind of systems to monitor what would happen. And in fact, that was an occasion to develop some tools. And again, everything went well. So what did we see on that famous IPv6 Day was, of course, a lot of HTML traffic, and the reason there is, of course, our content providers, who were the first promoters of IPv6 Day. Why the content providers as opposed to the ISPs is that the first ones who would suffer from a broken internet are the content providers, because their business model is based on an accessible internet. Their revenue comes from advertising. If the internet is broken, advertising money doesn't come that easily. So they benefit from addressable people. So that went on for days. Some left it on, so it was quite nice. Now, the interesting part is if we move forward. And some presentations still show us IPv4 or IPv6 Day as a real peak. Now, I asked one of our colleagues to produce some statistics, up to last week to see what happened in the meantime. And at the end of the graph there, at the beginning, you see the famous IPv6 day is a blip and disappeared in the background noise of history. Now, interesting enough, if you look in recent times, there's a huge peak of traffic there. And some people are really starting to kick the tires seriously. And of course, some of you will ask, who was that? I think I will not tell you, but I think you can easily guess. I think there are about a dozen networks and content providers in the world who can really go and generate that kind of peaks. And in the meantime, we have had a couple of smaller ones. So people are getting ready for something. So they really want to test. So it will be interesting when we meet next to see how that graph further evolves. If one looks at the Google statistics they generate, in fact, you can access that online. In fact, I went to have a look at this morning. If you look at it today, it's closing in on 0.4%. That's interesting. The other interesting part is everything nowadays is native. Redo, 6/4, and things like that is down to 0.02%. So a native internet is growing. This is all very good news. One aspect which is still of concern to our content providers is the brokenness. And it's due to that brokenness factor that they did not activate IPv6 full-time at this point in time. Brokenness, of course, as you know, is the fact that there's still a percentage of the end users who cannot access the internet anymore if IPv6 is activated. Most of the time, because of a misconfiguration in their end device, there were some problems in Chrome, there were some problems in the Apple OS, but that's getting slowly solved. And if one looks at the statistics which were shown at the IETF meeting in Quebec City this summer, it's really going down, and it's down to 0.02%. Now, what will be interesting, there is talk, I don't know if Latif has more details in the meantime about an IPv6 week, which would be held next year. Some had hoped to have it in February, but it will probably be more to June. And then, of course, all the content providers will go online in IPv6 for a whole week, and maybe by the end of then they will leave it online. There's another one of these proposals to turn on IPv6 on a permanent basis in January of 2013, which would be exactly 30 years after IPv4 has been adopted and the old protocol was shut off. So we'll see what happens. This is an interesting variable. And obviously, the world has changed since IPv6 day. Tier 1 carriers are all ready. Tier 2, still some holes on it, but it's getting there. On the end user and on the eyeball networks, things are evolving. Free in France, they are really #1 in IPv6 deployment. The Comcast here in the US is quite #1. In fact, Free in France, what's interesting, my daughter who lives in Strasbourg, she has IPv6 access. I live in Montreal, I don't have IPv6 address. So she told me, Dad, you talk about it, but you don't have it, I have it. Then she says, by the way, what can I do with IPv6? Then that was a difficult question. But I said, well, you can feed your dog remotely and turn on the lights and the rice cooker and things like that. And she says, yes, I'll look at it. So basically, we have liftoff on the network side. Where I come from, it's AS6453. It's one of the top networks in the world. Our customers are basically networks, so you have a set of about 500 ASs hanging off that AS6453, which is totally dual stack, not because I ever made a business case, but it's because of you guys using YouTube and things like that, which in turn increased traffic, which in turn allowed to tell engineering you have to upgrade the network, and engineer could then buy these inexpensive Cisco and Juniper cards, etc., etc. So we are totally dual stack, except one node in Bilbao, if I remember correctly. Other statistic, which I think is the most relevant one, is the percentage of the ASs connecting to us, which are dual stack, which is really growing by leaps and bounds, and in the meantime, it's more than 50%. In fact, now customers who renew, or new customers, they get V4 and V6 on by default. It's only if they opt out that they don't get IPv6. So that really feeds the ecosystem, and of course, the number of visible BGP entries continues to increase. As Latif was saying, if we reach 20,000, that should create a kind of an equilibrium, and then all of a sudden the universe will clear and the IPv6 will be transparent. Now, this being said, one of the log jams which has always been considered is on the CPE side, because of cable modems, because of DSL boxes, etc. I was pleasantly surprised to read an announcement from the Cable Association that, in fact, the renewal of cable to DOCSIS 3 happens very fast. And DOCSIS 3, of course, has V6 enabled. So basically, with that renewal cycle on the CPE side, I think V6 will really come on faster than anticipated. If one would look at the future, this is always interesting to do, especially the future is never what it used to be. So if one would look at the CIO report, this is basically what they would see. Again, they have IPv6 explicitly. And again, if you look at all the other elements, you always have that IPv6 component hidden somewhere. So you need addresses, you need lots of addresses to realize this vision. Some of us are really amateurs of Gartner. We read Gartner also, and they're quite good. And again, if you look at the strategic technologies for 2012 and beyond, again, if you would tick on the right side all the ones who would benefit from IPv6 addresses, you will definitely be able to do something. So this being said, where are these famous money trails? Mobile broadband was mentioned. I think we have to give kudos to our friends at Verizon. I'm not a Verizon customer because I'm in Canada, but still, they went out loud and clear in IPv6 support, and with LTE development all over the world, things just accelerate, and you don't do LTE without IPv6, because with LTE, you also need the voice part. That's where the VoLTE came in, voice over LTE, and the requirement for billing, et cetera, et cetera. Now, if you want to build someone in an IP world, you better have a correlation between your customer and the service rendered. I would like to be built hidden behind a net. I would never see a bill. So mobile to be followed. Other ones we were mentioned, smart grid, smart meters, smart everything. Hydro-Quebec wants to have a kind of a differentiated billing for electricity. So there would be a rate for your washing machine, one for the heating, one for the oven, etc. Of course, you have to say, I'm the oven on, and that's what I am. So you need a kind of a local network again to enable all these things. So a lot of money to be made. Carriers also and ISPs want to be involved. In fact, people like Verizon, AT&T, etc., now try to get into all these smart meterings offerings in competition sometimes with the hydro companies. And that also relates to your smart home, because if you have a smart meter with a kind of a Wi-Fi device embedded, you could in fact have all these hydro companies go into the telecom business. So a lot of money to be made in there. Another aspect is the famous embedded internet. So there will be a chip in everything. In fact, now I think a startup in California here has made a kind of a digestible chip. So basically your stomach acid will dissolve the chip. I can imagine the chip before it dies sending a last message, I have been consumed. Now if that chip is on a pill on a blue pill made by some pharmaceutical company, it would say, haha, it has been consumed. There it could say where it has been consumed, and it could even say with whom it has been consumed if the partner also had an embedded chip. So be careful in the future. Of course, you can make money to helping the transition like some of us are doing. In India, for example, the Indian government now has said all government services have to be IPv6 enabled next year. They just had a request for quotation out to select some consultants to really do everything. So and the government is big over there. Now here in the US, the government is not small either, and they also have a mandate to switch a lot of things to IPv6, including customer-facing things like websites, etc. So I think there's a window of opportunity there, which might last, I don't know, 3 years maybe when it will reach a peak, or 2 years, but there will be a long tail, in my opinion, to that consulting business. And of course, a lot of major companies are getting into the act also. Other money trails is clouds and virtualization. I think everyone has their head in the clouds nowadays. Again, you can have a cumulonimbus, you can have a stratocumulus and a lot of things in the clouds, but money is being made. In fact, we have deployed cloud services also, and it's really interesting for smaller and medium companies just to provide them computing and storage in the cloud. And another element is in there is you have to go green. It is very fashionable to go green, and there's money to be made, pretending to be green at least. And one of the applications we developed in Canada with Canary is a follow the sun, follow the wind. So basically your computing and storage resources would move around based on the availability of renewable energy. And of course, it's also good to have permanent addresses to do these things. So if you invest in there, you're good. So that being said, if you want to make money, just imagine that you're omnipotent. You know everything. Pater omnipotentis. If you know everything, just imagine some applications, and maybe there'll be some money to be made. Let me know. I might invest some money. Thank you.